Hello, I'm Logan.
And I'm Lexi.
And this is Pride and Prejudice, the podcast talking all things pride, but mainly we're talking about the T in LGBT. Media representation, the good, the bad, and the underdeveloped. Thankfully for this episode, we actually thought of way less bad examples of trans representation than we did good examples. Though there definitely is a lot of bad examples out there, but I think
I just blanked them out of my memory, to be honest.
Yeah, I tend to just avoid them because, why would I watch something that just makes me depressed? A lot of shows are kind of well known for it. So we'll go into the bad representation first, just to get it out of the way. I think the most popular example of a bad trans character in media that I can think of is Ace Ventura in the first movie. Basically, there was a twist that one of the characters was a man, and I say that because it's very confusing how it's set out. It's kind of implied that she's not a trans woman, but a man in disguise. He was just using a woman's persona to disguise himself, but that still doesn't make sense to me. Because no cis person would go through that amount of physical transition just for a disguise. It would give them dysphoria, most likely. Because we see at the end of the film that she obviously would have had to have surgeries in order to have achieved that level of passability that she does. But the way that it's revealed that she is trans, or maybe was a man in the context that maybe she disguised herself, is that the main character, Ace Ventura, strips off her clothing to prove to everyone that she's a man. You know, would a real woman have these boobs, even though some cis women don't have boobs? So kind of questionable. And also, no one stops him when he's like stripping off her clothes. No one's like, hey, maybe don't do this. This is like really creepy, like regardless of whatever point you're trying to make. And I know it's a comedy, suspension of disbelief, but I remember watching this for the first time and just feeling really uncomfortable. And then when everyone finds out that she is a trans woman, or perhaps a man in disguise, they all just start throwing up. It's like a whole gag, and it's supposed to be a joke, but I mean, people would be like, oh, you're too sensitive. I'm just like, what's the joke? You know?
That reminds me of another film from the 90s called The Crying Game, and it's not a comedy film at all. It's a drama, but there is a trans character in it, a trans woman played by a cisgender man, as they generally were at that time. Although you had Sean Young in Ace Ventura, who was a cis woman. And in The Crying Game, I think when the protagonist finds out that this woman is a trans woman, I'm pretty sure he vomits or something.
Yeah, it's a running gag. I've seen that in so many bad representations, that character throws up when they find out other character is trans, which thankfully the IT crowd didn't do. But it's just such a gross joke to make. Like, you couldn't make that joke fly with any other group of people, I don't think.
I mean, in real life, they're more likely to murder the trans woman, sadly. So it's kind of, in a way, it's making light of that. It's silly.
Yeah, and I think it's always important to be upfront with whoever you're going out with, or whoever you may be dating, about who you are. Mainly for safety reasons, because unfortunately trans people do get killed by bringing the wrong people home occasionally. But yeah, I do agree with what you said. It's kind of making light of that. The fact that it's a running joke is just really sickening, because it means enough famous writer people think that this is an okay joke to make. So there's quite a few examples of bad trans representation. There's an episode of Family Guy called Quagmire's Dad. Already a questionable title because it's not his dad, it's his mum. They also make this vomiting joke because the dog Brian sleeps with her and then finds out she's trans, and then he vomits for like a solid minute. It really drags it out. It's disgusting. The episode had some good points to make, because essentially at the end Quagmire has a go at his mum, saying oh, but I looked up to you because you were a war hero and you were like this symbol of masculinity, and like think about how this affects my life, which, you know, cry me a river. And then she just responds, yeah, I am still all of those things, you know, that was still a part of my life. You know, you can still look up to me for those things I did in the past, but that's not who I am now. And I think that's a good message. But just the way that the rest of the episode is laid out, especially with the episode title, it's just, yeah, Family Guy's not really the best show to be handling these kind of topics, because they don't really do their research very well. They also had a very questionable episode about domestic violence, which I won't go into because that's not what this podcast is about. But essentially it's just a lot of writers missing the mark. You know, if you cast trans people to play the parts, or even just talk to charities, talk to trans people, then you could probably not embarrass yourself by making a really disgusting episode that negatively affects people.
To be honest, I remember when you told me about this episode, because I haven't seen it, and my reaction was just, she sleeps with the dog.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So it's fine to sleep with a dog, but it's not okay to sleep with a trans woman. You can make the same mistake. You can make the same argument with gay couples in media. You know, Beauty and the Beast. You know, she fell in love with a anthropomorphic beast furry guy, and then as soon as you put a gay couple in the live action remake, they're like, oh no, this is inappropriate to show to kids. They're just like, bruh, get your priorities straight. You know. I might cover South Park as well, because the thing is with South Park, they haven't just had one episode about trans people, they've had several. And one episode I thought was actually really good. It was kind of about the whole bathroom bills and all the controversy about that. And they basically called out how stupid it is, saying, you're freaking out over nothing, just use whatever bathroom makes you comfortable. And, you know, trans people aren't a threat to cis people. This kind of applies more to trans women because there's more of a stigma towards them. A trans woman is more in danger going into the men's bathroom than she is going to the female bathroom. But then also she could be unsafe going into the female bathroom and being sort of hate crimes by cis women. The point I'm trying to make here is the chances of a trans woman transitioning to use the women's bathrooms is just ludicrous, really. No one would go through that amount of effort to do something like that. You know, it's not like we have scanners outside the bathroom detecting who's who. You know, legalizing trans women to use the bathrooms, you know, it's not like you have to show ID to go in the bathroom. Like, if a guy wanted to, you know, be gross in the women's bathroom, he would just go in and do that. You don't have to. It's
already illegal.
Yeah, it's already illegal. South Park, yeah, they kind of had this episode about the bathroom bill. Cartman basically pretended he was a trans woman so that he could use the girls' bathroom because the boys' bathroom was constantly taken up by people. And then he was basically trying to use this bill as an excuse to do that. But then at the end of the episode, they just kind of make it okay for anyone to use whatever bathroom. And then he was like, oh, well, I don't want to be trans now because of it. But you kind of have to... you kind of have to keep in mind of like who Cartman is as a character. Like, he's being a dick, and the point is that he's being a dick. Like, it's very... If you see the episode, you can kind of see that it's not really against trans people. It's kind of pro-trans in a way. But then South Park have also had some really dodgy episodes about trans women in sport. Which we haven't really covered in the podcast, but that's also a bit of a sort of a controversy. Even though trans women have been in sports since 2004, I believe, 2003, 2004, and you know, there's loads of conflicting information about that, which shows like South Park don't help with, because it was basically in the episode, it was a man pretending to be a trans woman so that he could enter women's sports and beat women, which just is a really weird thing to do. Like, To imply that any cis guy can be an athlete female because they're a guy. There are loads of factors that can potentially give you an advantage or a disadvantage in sports, and that can be to do with genetics. That can be to do with what race you are as well. There are sort of imbalances in sports anyway. But to imply that trans women have an advantage over cis women is scientifically not correct.
I mean, if I went in a race with cis women, I would come last.
Yeah. And historically, not a lot of trans women have won in these sports categories. Like I said, they've been in sports for years. Essentially, you had to have been on hormone therapy for, I think it's a couple of years before you can enter sports. And Lexi will probably elaborate more on this, but hormone replacement therapy, the estrogen kind, does kind of change a lot about your anatomy, especially when it comes to muscle mass.
Yeah, I mean, I never had a lot of muscle, but now I have very little at all, and, you know, I can't lift a lot, I can't open a lot of jars, things like that. And I'm not saying that's all the estrogen, that's because, you know, I don't do weightlifting or anything like that. But it certainly, that was one of the first things that kind of changed, or after I started estrogen, it completely decreased. So I would be useless in sports.
And the point I was trying to make to come back to this is, in the episode, the man who was pretending to be a trans woman, he got into sports like straight away, without like being on hormone replacement therapy, or even living as a woman for a certain amount of time, which I think also is a qualifying factor, which is legally not allowed to happen, and the episode is pretending like it is a thing that is allowed to happen, which is just blatantly spreading misinformation. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot more examples that at least we could think of which were positive representations in media. Do you want to talk about some Star Trek? Your special interest? One of them?
So, I mean, Star Trek in a way has always been kind of progressive, even since the 60s, of course, with characters like Uhura and Sulu. But more recently, we've had, I mean, Star Trek Discovery, which is one of the more recent series. There was a same-sex couple since the beginning, and a few seasons in, we had two trans characters, or characters played by trans actors. Characters of Adira and Grey, and Adira is non-binary and kind of discovers that through the course of the series, and Grey is their boyfriend. I was going to say ex-boyfriend, but he's kind of still around in their mind. It's very complicated. But yeah, it's just great to see kind of two trans characters played by trans people, and in a very respectful storyline. And it's also not a storyline about them being trans. They're just trans, and they're, you know, in space in the future, and it's all Star Trek.
Okay, we need to have an episode of Star Trek written by Neil Gaiman with David Tennant playing the main character, or a character. We'll have a really good mix there.
More likely to happen in Doctor Who.
Yeah, that's true, actually. So I'm going to talk about a character from The Last of Us, which most of you might know as it's been a series recently. Came out, season 1 came out, I think, last year. But it was, before it was a series, it was a game series. I'm going to be talking about a character from the second game. I don't know whether or not revealing this character counts as a spoiler, so just FYI, if you're playing the games and you don't want to get spoiled for this, just quick warning. In the game there's a character called Lev, and he doesn't really come on the screen and be like, hey, I'm trans, as probably a lot of 90s characters might have done. He basically kind of just gets introduced, and no one questions anything. He's just they think he's a cis guy, essentially, because he passes really well. But then later in the game, during one of the fighting levels, you can hear the NPCs that you're fighting calling Lev Lily, which really confused me the first time. I was like, who are they talking about? Who's Lily? I thought maybe they were referring to someone else. But then the character you're playing as asking about it is like, hey, why did they call you Lily? And he just kind of didn't answer. It's kind of supposed to be this like big religious cult that he came from. And he ran away from home because they wanted to kill him, essentially. And he never explains what he did to make them that angry with him. And then he eventually tells the character, he said, it's because I shaved my head. And she thinks it's a joke. She's like, okay, fine, don't tell me. And then later on we find out that's the actual reason. He shaved his head, which is a thing in his tribe that only men do. So it's kind of revealed then that he is a trans man. And I think that's kind of an interesting way of doing it, because a lot of trans people who can tend to go stealth about their transition because they're worried about people's reactions. You know, they don't tell people that they're trans unless they know that they are a safe person to talk to, which is something I have done a lot of times, because I have seen the hate online and just people in my real life as well. Whenever I meet a new person, I don't tell them that I'm trans because I'm afraid of what their reaction might be, and I don't think that should be the case in future. I don't think anyone should feel that way. So we spoke about Elliot Page earlier, but interestingly, Elliot Page transitioned during a season of the Umbrella Academy, which means the character that he was playing also transitioned. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I think the first 2 seasons of the Umbrella Academy, he was playing the character Vanya, who kind of had at the time, it was considered a gay storyline in the second season. But then Elliot Page transitioned after that season, and there was kind of they acknowledged it very much in the show by having the character of Vanya transition to Victor. Although I found it quite amusing because it kind of all happened within 1 or 2 episodes, and it was like the character Victor went and got a haircut and then basically came back and was like, oh, I'm Victor now. And because the characters kind of weren't all paying attention to each other, it's sort of gradually across the season, other members of the family are like, oh, you're Victor now. I've got a brother now. I didn't realise.
Oh, that's wholesome.
So one TV show that kind of, I guess, trumps all of the examples that we've given just because of the sheer amount of trans representation is my favourite TV show, which is Pose. It took me a long time to kind of get through all of it just because it tends to make me cry, but it is very good, and it's about the ballroom culture in New York in the 1980s and 90s. So most of the characters are kind of black gay men or trans women, and it really does follow this group of trans women through their lives for a period of about 10 years, and it's, you know, written and directed and produced by trans people as well, and stars trans people. Janet Mock, who's a writer that I read years before Pose came out, she's directed and written a lot of the episodes, and numerous other people. And I mean, India Moore, who is a non-binary actor, plays my favourite character on the show as well, Angel. And it's not obviously not an exploration of trans women's lives in nowadays, but it's very much an exploration of what it was at that time during the AIDS crisis, and how the community was kind of pretty much ignored and had to stick up for themselves. But it's also about trans joy as well. certainly for characters like Angel, she gets married, which was a very emotional episode.
Was that the one you said made you cry, or was there more than one?
There's been a number of episodes that made me cry.
Oh no. In a good way. Yeah.
Yeah, that
So to conclude, something that I've kind of noticed about all these positive representations is that every single example we've listed has been played by a trans person. So that's really great. I think there should be more trans representation in the media done by presented by people who are trans, nothing about us without us.
Thanks for listening to the Pride and Prejudice podcast.
And be sure to check out the other episodes.
Bye.
Bye.